Before I begin, I want to happily announce that this time I'm gonna use a real harpsichord that I found at the Musikhochschule in Detmold. I don't know if this is a great instrument, but it obviously is some sort of historical imitation. It's got 2 manuals and a stop button, providing the possibility of adding another octave to each key. I didn't expect the recording quality being so satisfiable. I give you a little sample demonstration. And now let's have a little talk on the circle of fifths. I guess you'll be astonished to see how the circle of fifths has been generated in 18th century Italy, which will take me exactly 3 steps. Step 1 is to take one of the oldest multi-voice artifacts, the 6th chord chain, also known as Fauxbourdon. Step 2 is to apply a chain of 7/6 suspensions to it, which makes a standard Baroque pattern that most of you probably already know. The third step is to break up the linear descending bass line into the common zigzag of fourths and fifths, and the result is a third and a seventh above every bass note. So what appears to be a motion of 7th chords can legitimately as well be seen as a contrapuntal diminution of a stepwise descending bass line. In a 3-voice sequential counterpoint schema like this, it's normally possible to exchange the upper voices, so you've got always 2 different versions to transpose. Here's the same example with inverted voices. Isn't this a fresh view, to look at the circle of fifths as a contrapuntal unit instead of a chord progression? Now you've taken the red pill, I'm gonna show you a counterpoint procedure that I used to call underlaying of alternative bass lines. Basically, you've already witnessed this procedure when I planted the circle of fifths bass line below the 7/6 chain scaffolding. Here's an example. You can recognize that the upper voice fabric stays completely intact. And another one, and this time I've exchanged the upper voices. Instead of 2 complete cycles, I'm gonna drop out earlier and attach a bigger so-called cadenza doppia. Here's an example of a simple diminution of the upper voices using changing notes and passing tones to embellish the scaffolding using a popular Baroque rhythm. In this version, I diminished all participating voices. The primary skeleton is still there on the quarter beats, and the smaller note values are just embellishing the underlying scaffolding without disturbing its basic mechanism. Same bass line, but part of a 2-voice example. The single voice melody is as well based on the 2 voices of the trio style and connects them within a single line. This is another basic circle of fifths bass line consisting of leaping thirds and ascending seconds, which will be the central skeleton of the upcoming examples. The simple counterpoint indicates that every second chord is a sixth chord. Regarding from a fundamental bass perspective that observes fundamental root progressions in music, this is a circle of fifths. Here's a full four-voice realization. A typical trio-style structure to this kind of bass line would include dissonant 5/6 chords, and again we do have the possibility to exchange the upper voices. Here are two plain examples. This is an example that demonstrates a very simple diminution concept that could be named as breaking up. The structure is essentially the same whilst the scaffolding is being rhythmically animated. Here I embellished the scaffolding with changing notes and passing tones. A common bass diminution that you can find in composed music and as well in some partimento is this one. The established chain of suspensions in the upper voices remains exactly the same as in the previous example, just like the implied possibility of voice exchange. Another prevalent figuration that one occasionally observes upon this bass line is the dissonance of the ninth. To the hands it feels just like the 5/6 chords, as this is essentially the same chain of suspensions for the right hand. I would enter this sequence from the dominant to get the ninth well prepared. Here is a common bass diminution. Additionally to that, I demonstrate as well the possibility to exchange upper voices. Now an example with embellished upper voices. Again, it's just passing and changing notes decorating the scaffolding. Now the third basic circle of fifths bass line that in Old Italy was called legature del basso, that from a contrapuntal view is just a chain of suspensions in the bass and doesn't necessarily imply the harmonic idea of a circle of fifths progression. But what you actually can observe in this example is the outright fact that the upper voice does resemble the primary circle of fifths bass line with the zigzag of fourths and fifths. We are digging in the rabbit hole of double counterpoint right now. In fact, the structure can be seen as inversion of a contrapuntal fabrication that already appeared at the beginning of this video. You recognize that every interval is the exact inversion. A second becomes a seventh, a third becomes a sixth, and vice versa. To a fundamental bass approach, this bass line implies diatonic 2/4-6 chords resolving into sixth chords. tracing this chordal sequence back to its root progression, you obtain the primary circle of fifths bassline. So from both perspectives, be it the harmonic or the contrapuntal, there is an interrelation between these sequences. Still more diminutions. A standard embellishment type you'll find in several original compositions in partimenti is this one. You're right if the upper voice reminds you of a bass line I already presented, and I tend to consider this as well as an inversion type. So again, both patterns are connected through the contrapuntal procedure of voice exchange. If you want to dig deeper, I highly recommend to explore this partimento by Insanguine that obviously tracks down on this interrelation. If you're interested, there's a realization of this partimento on my channel. And there's a partimento fugue as well on the same invertible schema by George Frideric that's relatively easy to grasp, so I guess there's much to explore. This diminution type is borrowed from a partimento by Durante. I wouldn't consider this as a circle of fifth sequence even if the bassline is the same. I already told you that this bassline can as well be seen as a chain of suspensions, and I guess that the example below is the supposed scaffolding. Final example. Here I added an agent's voice to the left hand to properly establish the chain of suspensions. This is a common trio strategy as the right hand is completely uncommitted and open for all kinds of embellishment. I think one can recognize that the diminutions stem from breaking up the 4-part version. So keep in mind these 3 different bass lines and their implied thorough bass figures. Train the 2, 3 and 4 voice examples and try to add different cadences. And don't forget to transpose.